Well, good morning and welcome to another day on Cornwall Pocket Farm, where I try and figure out how to live sustainably on 300 square metres in the city. Today we are doing something completely different. I've been working on a garden design for my friends who have recently moved. The people that gave me those pots, the ones I've just upcycled, they gave me the pots because they moved from their larger house with a garden into a new build development sort of townhouse setup. I suppose it would be a typical new build. They have put down all this plastic grass, fake grass, and then they've got a planter around the outside which doesn't have any soil in it. It's just full of building rubble, but they've sort of dug a few random little holes and put in some shrubs that are currently dying because they're not properly planted. I mean, heavens, some of them are even like an inch proud of the soil, the ground level. So they're just dying, really slow death. They're certainly not green, and they're certainly not going to romp away and make a luxurious garden space. But obviously my friends have moved in there and they'd really like a nice garden. So they asked me to come along and have a little look at the garden and come up with my suggestions, a sort of a design that they might look at doing. So that was very exciting, and that's exactly what I've done. But I thought I would bring you along and show you the process and also the result of what I've come up with. And I'm sharing it with you on my channel because I think it's very much a part of sustainability. What we really need is a lot less of that and a lot more of gardens that have lush growth and habitat for insects and birds and growing things and carbon capture and all of those sorts of things is what we need, even in our, well, I was going to say even in our urban areas, but definitely and more so in our urban areas. I am also going to make a shameless plug here because this is very closely linked with a workshop that I'm running on the 15th of April. So in a couple of weeks' time in Auckland, I am actually running a garden design workshop through Secret Gardens. I will put a link somewhere down below, up above. I'm running a garden design workshop on how to design a pocket farm, essentially how to design a food-producing, edible garden. But the process is very similar. There are some differences, but essentially designing a garden of any description generally will follow along the pattern that I'm going to show you today. So if you're in Auckland on the 15th of April and you're interested, it's a 3-hour workshop on Saturday morning, and we're basically running through how to design an edible garden in an urban environment. But in the meantime, what we're doing, of course, is looking at my friend's garden. So the first thing you need to do when you're designing your garden is to get the measurements of the space, of course, because essentially you're going to plan it from a bird's eye view. That's the easiest way because you can get a really accurate idea of the space available. So you need to measure it right down, take more measurements than less, and also take triangulation, so take diagonal measurements across other measurements, because that will make sure that you haven't gone wrong. It's a safe check. If that measurement is this and this measurement is that, if you take that triangulated measurement, you know that it's correct. It's geometry, don't ask me, but it works. So anyway, take lots of measurements and also take some photographs so that afterwards, when you're sitting in your studio or in your living room, you can look back at the pictures and go, oh yes, I remember this, that and the other. When I visit a garden, I like to walk around and feel the space. I know that sounds a bit mad, but often the best way to design a garden is to sort of stand in a particular place in the garden and see what it feels like as a human being. What does this particular space feel like? Do you feel overlooked? Do you feel vulnerable? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel warm? Do you feel battered by the wind? Quite often what people will do is they'll look at the garden from a distance and they'll go, oh, okay, I think we're going to put a deck over there, because they're looking at it from this angle over there. That looks like a nice place for the deck. But if you go and sit on that piece of the deck and turn around, you might find that that is where you're overlooked from the neighbours, or that's where it's shady and you wanted sun, or there's a whistling wind coming past you at that particular spot. So you have your measurements. I then have a pad of paper which is A2 in size. It was a cheap pad of paper just from a stationery shop. It's got nice thin paper in it, which is important because when you draw up your base plan, you want to ink it in black, like I have done on this plan that you'll see. And then you can put it underneath and overlay other pieces of paper on top and then try out different designs or different stages of the design process. So get your piece of paper, mine's A2, and then you work out how big you can make the garden with the largest measurements. How big can you make it on your plan? Essentially, what's your scale going to be? So for this garden, my scale was 3 centimetres equals 1 metre. And the way I make that scale work is I take my measurement that I've taken on the garden, I times it by 3 for the 3 centimetres, and then I just move the decimal point. Then that will fit nicely on my page, and every measurement I do that and turn it into centimetres rather than metres. And then I can draw it all out, sense check it with the triangulation, and that's my plan. And I put on it, of course, all the things like the water access points, the sight lines and all that type of information. So now you've drawn up your scale plan. You're looking at an overview of the garden. What can you see? So I'm looking at this particular garden and I can see a few issues. I can see that the space is a really odd shape. I can see that the space feels really like I'm sat in a hole being overlooked. It's that gladiator pit feeling. That plan to bed it's quite high, and I'm not a very big person, but it makes me feel very small. The fence that runs along the left hand side is really blocking to my view, and it's quite high and it makes me feel quite enclosed. That is not the boundary of the garden. On the other side of those panels is actually the path that goes up to the gate. The developers have actually blocked visually the full extent of the garden, which is madness because in a small space you want as much visual distance as possible, and also you want to trick the eye into thinking that there is more beyond that, more garden that exists further on. So yeah, those panels definitely need to come out, but of course they've been put there because the path that goes up is higher, and obviously there's a safety issue that you don't want to be able to fall off the path. I can see that there's no access up to the gate, which is the easiest way to get to the shops and cafes and those types of things. But the only way to access that gate is to go through the house, out of the front door and all the way around the side of the house, which is bizarre. Who has a back gate that you can only access from the front door? I can see where I'm overlooked. The garden is very much overlooked. So all on the right hand side it is overlooked, but over on the left hand side of the garden I've got a hedge which is sitting on somebody else's property, but behind that I just have sky. I have no houses overlooking me there. That vista essentially goes to the hedge and then off into the distance into the sky, so it's infinite. So that's good, and that's also the side that the sun is coming from. So the sun is coming over the top of that hedge and into the garden. There is also nothing to look at. When you are sitting on the patio that they've put there, you're just literally looking at the wall. So because it's sunken down into the ground, it's quite a sort of a pit. There's no view. You've got this grey wall and then you've got the houses overlooking. The green of that plastic grass is the only thing that adds colour to that garden. So the garden design really needs to add a splash of colour and add some interest. I can see that it's very sheltered, that there's really no wind in that space, but I can also feel that it's really quite hot. And that plastic grass is incredibly hot. It doesn't get cool like normal grass. It's not cool underfoot. It gets hot in the sun. And I dread to think what that garden is going to feel like in the middle of summer. In the middle of a hot summer that we do get in Auckland, it is just going to be unbearably baking. Yeah, you won't be able to be in the garden with just all that concrete. Obviously, the biggest problem in this garden, hands down, is that there is no soil. Yeah, I mean, is it even a garden if there isn't any soil? I don't know, I think so. It's an outdoor space, certainly, but yet to be a garden because there is no soil. And then when you think about that, you've got to think about access. Because if there is no soil, you need to bring soil in. If you've got ground level that has no soil, the only way to get soil in is to go up or to dig out the sort of subsurface, what will be clay and rubble and nastiness, dig that out and take it away, which is difficult because obviously the access is really poor now the house has been built. So you've got to get soil into the garden somehow, and you want to probably limit removing the rubbish that's there that you don't want. So that's a bit of an issue. Another thing to think about as well was that potentially there's some drainage issues. You've probably heard just recently about the incredibly heavy rain that we've had in Auckland, and there's been flooding everywhere. The reason that it's got plastic grass there is because that is classed as permeable, and you can't really put into this garden any more non-permeable elements because you're likely to create problems with drainage. Also, the more plants you add in there, the better it's going to be because those plants are going to take up that moisture and manage that potential stormwater issue. So when I'm looking at the shapes, ugly shapes here are the weird deep point down right in the corner of the house. But nice shapes in the garden, the very top corner sort of forms a little bit of a square, or could do, and that's a really nice feeling shape. And then the curve that comes around, that's interesting and intriguing, and that's a really pleasant shape. It also has that existing plant bed that runs all the way around the right hand side of the garden and around the top. So that's already established and built and there. The only problem there really is that it is full of really rubbish soil. So, well, soil, rubbish material, builder's rubble basically. So at a minimum that needs to be dug out and replaced with good quality soil so that then we can put some decent plants in that planter bed that already exists. At the moment the main access point onto the patio and the main viewpoint from the living area actually looks across the table to a heat pump and a drain and a wall and sort of the access to the side of the house, which is a bit unattractive but also quite uncomfortable feeling when you're sitting at the table on the patio, because you've got that feeling of vulnerability, again coming back to the animalistic feeling. I can see the space, I can see that it's a bit awkward, and I have a memory of how it felt in different spaces, and I also have the logic of what needs to happen in this space. I need to have some sort of seating area, I need to have some way to get up to that back gate, I need to have interesting things to look at through the window, I need to have interesting things to look at from the table, and I also need to have interesting things to look at from the seating area. And as an extra cherry on the top, what would be fabulous would be some mystery. It's a bit of an ask in a small garden like this, but a little bit of mystery, a little bit of surprise, something round a corner would be really useful to have as well. And she did specifically also say that she didn't want a jungle. She likes quite a nice tidy space. So with also with that in mind, them not being mad gardeners, relatively low maintenance garden I think is also what we're going for. And then for me the next stage is a bubble plan, and that's where you put an overlay piece of paper on your base plan and you mark in very roughly with just sort of circles or just ovals all the information that you're going to need to design a successful garden. And I find that usually means that I sort of know where things are going to go really quite early on in the process. So for instance with this garden, the steps really they had to go in that corner because that is the lowest part of the path. Anywhere further up to get to the path, it would be the steps would be just so steep and high, it wouldn't work. I wanted a seating area which needed to be in the most private area of the garden. And you also want somewhere where you've got a nice view, a nice vista, something to look at. So those types of things are going to start to inform your design, so that sort of eventually there's really only a couple of different ways it can work. And that makes design really easy. I always find that the worst design is when you have no constraints whatsoever. Designing something when there's no constraints and the area is huge is much more difficult than designing something small where there are quite clear constraints. Then after that, you put a new overlay on, and you can then start to work out the specifics of your design, and then start to finesse how the proportions and how things are going to flow, and what are the details of the design. So bearing that in mind, this is the design that I came up with. This is the house here, and then this is the patio. So the key features in this garden are that obviously we need to get some steps, making use of this really strange space, and get up onto the path at its lowest point. So here it's lowest, and then obviously it comes up high up here, up to the gate. So this way there's access with a fairly gentle rise of only sort of 3 steps at a time up onto an intermediate platform here, where maybe there could be a little bench or something like that and some planters. Also, I've put here there's 2 blue things here. These are essentially just indicating focal points. So I'm imagining something like a little sculpture or a pot or something there, so that when you're in the house and you look through this window, you can see something interesting on the other side of the window. This hedge stops short, and also there's more housing over here. So keeping these top 2 panels between the posts that already exist, basically just taking out the solid panels and putting in wires. And then from the garden underneath, and potentially also these beds here, we can put in some climbers that can climb along these wires and create a much softer, more interesting visual appeal, extending that view line. And with the steps accessing up here, it looks like you're going up to more garden that exists over here that actually doesn't, of course, exist. So those steps mean that we've solved that issue of getting to this easy pedestrian gate, and we've also solved that issue of a really weird pointy bit with nothing going on, and why is it there? The other issue with this path is that it's actually in a sort of a really loose gravel. Currently, the bins have to be dragged all the way around the street and all the way up to here, whereas if the bins were down here, they could just basically come up here to the point where they're collected. This surface of this path, I'm thinking, could be something like a patterned concrete, which would be easy to install, would be easy for the bins to roll up, and easy to manage. If we put plants in along here and then have a curved path, it adds more interest. One of the things that's really missing in this garden is anywhere comfortable to sit. The garden is very much overlooked from this side and this side. So the most private place in the garden is actually this space here, because if we put a pergola over the top of this, nobody can overlook this space. And also then the outlook is across here to your garden. So again, privacy, there's no overlooking from this space. It's also close to the patio area, so very easy to access. So what I'm imagining is this area is a sort of a gravel garden with pavers leading you through to a small deck here. This would be a decking area with a pergola over the top to provide that privacy and a nice little room to sit in, if you like. Down the side of this little room, I'm anticipating a planter box with some trellis. You're not exposed. You feel quite sheltered and private in this space with a pleasant outlook. This is the pot that my friend really likes, the really large pot. She also has another really nice pot which I've put here. This area here is actually raised. These are the raised planters that are already around the side of the garden. They just need to be dug out with the builder's rubble that's there and replaced with good soil. Now we do have good access in this garden for putting things in the garden. Topsoil could come in here and with the aid of gravity could be dropped into this planting area and also down into this space, which then could just be spread about manually. So to start with, this could be dug out into the base of this area, and then on the top of that we can put in some decent soil. So essentially getting rid of this unwanted material without taking it off site. This is the only area on the property where really you could get a decent sized tree to grow, because it has the space for the canopy. So with that in mind, I've put in a planter box here which is a really good size, and this planter box here will be about 800 mil high. It'll be about the same height as these planter beds around the side. So a good depth of soil and a good width of soil to get in a decent sized tree, and then with an understory of shrubs and things around it as well. Then the ground level drops down a little bit here to say about 500 millimeters off the ground, again providing enough space there to get in decent soil to grow some reasonable sized shrubs, and again a reasonable sized tree, not quite as big as this one, but a reasonable sized tree. So this area here is all the same height above the ground, so a little retaining wall here. I'm imagining this could be a timber retaining wall, so I'm imagining that this is really quite a large shrub. And then across here, again, quite high shrubs, so that if you were on the deck looking this way, you can't see what's behind it. So you've created that mystery. The only way to see what's in here is actually to sit in this seating area and look across, or to come around here and explore and go up onto this area here. There's one step up to get onto the decking area, and then there's 2 or 3 extra steps here in ground to get up onto this raised area here. And then this area becomes quite a private, tranquil little space with a water feature and a couple of little benches or a little seating around it. I'm imagining this is a lemon tree. This could be really any small tree that you fancy, but a lemon tree is a pretty much a staple in a New Zealand garden, and obviously provides the lemons for the gin and tonics which would be consumed here. So this is some low planting here just to create a sense of separation, but over which you can look. So you could sit here and look over, see the tree, and also see and hear the water feature which would be running here. And I'm imagining that this water feature would be solar powered. It would not require electricity and water and everything to be plumbed to this space. And here there's some form of growing ground cover, because remember here we have the topsoil. You could put some pavers through here and then not walk on this ground cover and have this more as sort of native grasses or that type of thing. Or you could do a ground cover that you can walk on. But whatever, this area here is a quiet, tranquil, hidden little space that you wouldn't necessarily see directly from the house. And likewise, if you were sitting here, you wouldn't see directly into the house. Of course, that means that this wall, these planters around the back, which were originally 800 high, now become quite low planters. You've got something that you can maybe engage with and interact with a little more, because actually it's only a few hundred mil off the ground essentially here. When you come down here onto this decking area, I'm anticipating some sort of climber. In my head, I'm seeing something like a bougainvillea, which would really splash that colour at certain times of the year. It would really enjoy the heat that you would get in this sort of space. Ideally, what you'd want would be an evergreen, because the idea of the climber is to provide privacy to this space. And in the winter months, of course, the low-level sun will be streaming in across here. So you would still get sun in here in the winter. And then in the summer, as the sun comes up, that climber over the top would provide the shade that you would need to sit, to have a nice seating area here. When you're thinking about the plantings here, you've still got to keep in mind that idea that it's going to be relatively hot. So you're looking at things that maybe would be more Mediterranean or native plantings, or something more that's more of a tropical environment, but bearing in mind that my friends don't want a jungle feel. You could, for instance, do hibiscus. They would enjoy the heat. And again, climbers and trailing plants spilling over the edge. And you making use of this planter bed by having shrubs and low maintenance plantings that would come all the way around the outside. Looking at this area here where the patio is and the seating area is, having a planter box here with a trellis at the back would provide that privacy from that entrance through the side of the house, the heat pump, the drain. So from the table here, you would see some nice climbing plants. Again, it might have a nice smell. It might be something like a jasmine. You could put in some salad greens, or you could maybe put some herbs in here. It would be higher off the ground. It would be easy to garden that. This side here, again, you've got another planter box here with a trellis, which makes this area private. And you have a focal point here so that when you come out of the house and you're walking along here, you can look down and see something interesting that would maybe draw your eye. And I'm imagining an archway here with something climbing over there. When you're coming down the steps here and you're coming around to the house, you're seeing a pathway that sort of disappears interestingly round the corner. That's always lovely in a garden, when you have somewhere that disappears round the corner and you don't know what's round there. I've done a cross section as if you were sort of cutting maybe through here. So imagining cutting a line through here and then looking that way. So if you're looking over here, you've got the steps here, the steps that go up to the top path. Obviously you can't see all of the steps because the house is in the way. And then this is the gravel layer. This is ground level here with the pot. And then here you've got the slightly higher raised bed, which is about 800 millimeters high, which is where that mature tree is sitting. Then it drops down a little bit to about 600 millimeters. The raised beds around the pot, and then also that ground cover area with that small lemon tree in. This lower line here is the deck. So you step onto the deck, and then you would step a couple more steps up onto this sort of ground cover layer, which may be grass or could be thyme, something like that. And of course at the back, this grey, I've tried to leave the existing structures in grey. So this grey area here, this is the planter bed once you're on that raised level. So the planter bed here is really only going to be about 200 millimeters high, so not very high at all when you're on that raised area. And of course you can see the pergola coming over the top of the deck area. Okay, so sitting on here on the seats, you'll be able to look over at the water feature, the lemon tree, and this ground cover area. This is the existing planter that you can see over here. So obviously that's a cross section through it. So you're seeing sort of the tree roots, if you like. This is that existing planter wall that's 800 high. And that's the absolute outside of the garden, that big wall that goes all the way up to the fence panels on the top. And then looking down, this is the path that runs down the back here. You can see the two existing panels I've left at the top. And then from there on, it's wires that you could grow climbers on and across. So you've still got that protection from the path for safety, but then you can grow greenery. So when you look across, you're basically seeing the shrubs, the big tree, the climbers on the wires, and then through to this existing hedge that is sitting behind, which actually isn't on the property at all, it's the neighbour's property. But it gives that vista of green which will sort of step up and back. The water feature, as you can see, is fairly generic here. Obviously, the product that's chosen for there is yet to be decided. But hopefully that gives a little idea of the layers. Of course, this grey that you're seeing at the back here, this is the existing wall that comes from the house all the way around the back of the garden and along to the curve here. The cross section was really just to try and show you the different levels going back. And the idea is there that rather than having this sort of full, really deep sort of gladiator pit idea, you've got more of an amphitheatre in that it steps back and envelops you rather than making you feel like you're at the bottom of a big hole in the ground. It's just a little bit of more gentle ascent up to those really high back walls, which again, I think those high back walls would be brilliant to have some climbers going up there, sort of behind the shrubs. So there's a whole range of things that can be done with the planting as well, but hopefully with that sort of structure in place and getting some soil into the garden, that is the key thing to actually start to get things growing, keep the temperature down, give visual interest, and create a space that you really want to go into, explore, sit in and enjoy. So for the planting in this garden, it would need to be something that is quite tolerant of warm, dry, sheltered spaces. There is opportunity for quite a bit of irrigation here, which is an advantage. There is a tap on both sides of the garden. So definitely irrigating all those spaces with planting is going to be important to provide that moisture. If you have any ideas about plants for this garden, please do put it in the comments below, because I'd really be interested in what you think would grow well in this space. I haven't done a plants list yet. I need to talk to my friend more about what sort of plants she'd like in the garden, and then if indeed this is the sort of thing that would appeal to them. I think that it would provide a really nice, tranquil, interesting space at the back of their new home. I think it would also provide the facility they want, that sort of seating area without being overlooked, the steps up to enable them to use that back gate from the garden itself, access to bring the bins up and down, and that sense of mystery and intrigue and something to look at and explore. And also don't forget that workshop on the 15th of April. That's not this Easter weekend, the following Saturday. If you're in Auckland, I'd love to see you and I'd love to have you along to my workshop. Subscribe, comment, thumbs up, all those types of things really help my channel grow, so that would be very much appreciated. And I'll see you next time.